Dust plumed against the late afternoon sun, a tawny cloud signaling a rare intrusion into Harmony Creek's quiet rhythm. Nathan Cole, astride his sorrel mare, reined in on a small rise overlooking the settlement. His gaze, usually fixed on the vast expanse of his ranch land, now tracked the approaching stagecoach with an intensity that belied his outwardly calm demeanor. It wasn't often the dusty behemoth ventured this far off the main routes, and curiosity, a rare indulgence for him, tugged at his practical nature. He'd ridden into town for supplies, but the creak of wagon wheels and the distant crack of a whip had diverted him. The coach, a battered testament to countless miles, finally lurched to a halt in front of the livery stable, its horses blowing steam. A few townsfolk, equally drawn by the spectacle, ambled closer. Nathan remained where he was, a silent sentinel, his eyes scanning the disembarking passengers. A grizzled old prospector, a traveling salesman with a worn satchel, and then her. She stepped down with a hesitant grace, her small hand reaching for the driver's arm for support. Her dress, though plain, seemed to cling to a delicate frame, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that couldn't quite conceal its natural wave. What struck Nathan immediately, however, wasn't her beauty, though it was undeniable, even beneath the travel dust, but the profound sadness etched around her eyes. It was a weariness that went beyond the fatigue of a long journey, a quiet sorrow that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. Nathan dismounted, tying his mare to a weathered post. He watched as she spoke briefly with the driver, her voice too low to carry, then turned, her gaze sweeping over the handful of buildings that comprised Harmony Creek. There was a lost quality to her expression, as if she were a shipwrecked sailor sighting a distant, unfamiliar shore. He felt an unfamiliar pull, a sense of protectiveness stirring within him, a primal instinct he usually reserved for his livestock or the sanctity of his land. Their eyes met across the dusty street. Hers were a deep, uncertain blue, wide with a vulnerability that pierced through his usual reserve. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of her presence. She offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile in return, a fragile bloom in the landscape of her sorrow. Later, as the sun dipped below the western mesas, painting the sky in fiery hues, Nathan found himself at the saloon, nursing a single whiskey. He rarely frequented the establishment, preferring the solitude of his home, but tonight the image of the woman's haunted eyes lingered. The saloon door creaked open, and she entered, looking even more out of place than before. She carried a small, leather-bound valise and seemed to hesitate, her gaze searching, until it landed on the proprietor. "Excuse me," she began, her voice soft but clear, carrying easily in the relative quiet of the early evening. "I was told I might find work here. My name is Emma Vale." The proprietor, a burly man named Gus, stroked his chin. "Work? For a lady? We don't get many of those looking for honest work in Harmony Creek, ma'am." He glanced at Nathan, then back at Emma, his expression softening slightly. Nathan pushed his glass aside and rose, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. "Mrs. Vale," he said, his voice a low rumble, drawing her attention. "Nathan Cole. I own the ranch just west of town." Emma turned, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Mr. Cole, thank you for earlier." He nodded. "You said you're looking for work?"
Yes, anything, really. I'm a widow, Mr. Cole. My husband passed away some months ago."
Her voice faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "He wasn't a kind man. After he died, his brothers came. They took everything: my home, my meager savings, even my personal effects. They said I had no claim, that a woman's property passed to the closest male relative." A shadow crossed her features, darkening her eyes. "They left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a train ticket as far as they were willing to pay. I've been traveling for weeks, trying to find a place where I can simply exist." Nathan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He'd heard stories of such cruelty, though never witnessed it so directly. The injustice of it, the blatant disregard for a woman's dignity, stirred a simmering anger within him. He studied her, noting the faint tremor in her hands, the way she clutched her valise as if it were her only anchor in a storm. She wasn't asking for charity. She was asking for a chance, and in her eyes he saw not weakness, but a quiet, desperate resilience. "My ranch could use a cook and housekeeper," Nathan heard himself say, the words surprising even him. He'd managed his household just fine for years, preferring his own company. "It's honest work, hard work, but you'd have a roof over your head and regular pay, and no one would bother you." He met her gaze, his own unwavering. "Harmony Creek is a quiet place, and I'm a man who keeps his word." Emma stared at him, her lips slightly parted. Hope, fragile and tentative, flickered in her eyes, chasing away some of the lingering fear.
"Mr. Cole, I don't know what to say. I would be eternally grateful."
"No need for gratitude, Mrs. Vale," he said, his voice softer now. "Just an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. Gus, can you tell Mrs. Vale where she can find my foreman, Jed? He'll take her up to the ranch in the morning." Gus, looking somewhat bewildered but also relieved, quickly agreed. Nathan turned back to Emma, a flicker of something akin to resolve in his deep-set eyes. He didn't know this woman, didn't know the full extent of her troubles, but he knew injustice when he saw it, and he knew a person in need of a safe harbor. The whisper of the wind outside seemed to carry a promise, a new chapter unfurling in the quiet, dusty heart of Harmony Creek. A new home on the ranch. Nathan watched the last stagecoach rumble out of Harmony Creek, its dust cloud settling slowly over the main street. He turned back to Emma, her hands still clutching the worn satchel. The raw grief in her eyes, though momentarily masked by surprise at his offer, was palpable. He cleared his throat, the sound a little rougher than he intended. "It ain't much, Mrs. Vale, but it's honest work. Cookin' and keepin' the ranch house tidy. Got a small cabin out back, too, if you'd be needin' a place." Emma's gaze flickered from his face to the dusty ground, then back to him, a flicker of something akin to hope igniting in their depths. "A cabin?" Her voice was soft, barely a whisper. You'd truly offer that?" "Wouldn't offer it if I didn't mean it," Nathan replied, his tone firm but not unkind. He disliked seeing anyone brought so low, especially by the avarice of others. "The ranch is a good distance from town, quiet. You'd have your own space." A tremulous sigh escaped her lips.
"Mr. Cole, I don't know what to say. I have nothing to offer in return but my labor.
That's what I'm hiring you for, he said, a small smile touching his lips. Good cooking and a clean house are worth a fair wage to me. We can head out now, if you're ready. Emma nodded, the motion almost imperceptible, but her grip on the satchel tightened, a silent affirmation. The journey to the Cole Ranch was a quiet one, the rhythmic clop of the horse's hooves and the creak of the wagon acting as a lullaby to her troubled spirit. As they neared, the sprawling landscape opened up, revealing rolling hills dotted with sturdy oaks and the distant gleam of a winding creek. The ranch house, a solid two-story structure of weathered timber, stood sentinel amidst a cluster of outbuildings. It wasn't grand, but it exuded a sense of permanence and strength. Nathan led her to a small, single-room cabin nestled beneath a towering cottonwood tree, a short walk from the main house. Inside, it was simple but clean, a narrow cot against one wall, a small table, and a pot-bellied stove. A fresh stack of firewood lay beside the hearth. "It's small," he said, gesturing around the space. "But it's yours. Privacy, if you need it. I'll send one of the hands over with some supplies later." Emma stepped inside, her fingers tracing the rough-hewn wood of the table. The air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. It was a haven, a sanctuary in a world that had, until now, offered only cold indifference. A profound sense of relief washed over her, the tension she hadn't realized she was carrying slowly beginning to ebb. "It's perfect, Mr. Cole. More than I could have ever hoped for." Over the next few days, a quiet routine began to take shape. Emma, with a surprising efficiency, took to her duties. The aroma of freshly baked bread and savory stews soon permeated the ranch house, a welcome change from the bachelor fare Nathan and his hands were accustomed to. She cleaned with a meticulousness that transformed the dusty rooms into inviting spaces, her movements graceful and unhurried. She found a strange comfort in the rhythm of ranch life, the lowing of cattle, the distant shouts of the cowboys, the vast, open sky that stretched endlessly above. The solitude of her cabin at night was a balm, allowing her to process the raw wounds of her past without the crushing weight of judgment. She discovered a fledgling patch of wild roses behind the cabin and spent a morning carefully tending to them, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing something beautiful. Nathan, often a man of few words, observed her from a distance. He saw the subtle lifting of her shoulders, the gradual return of a faint color to her cheeks. He noticed the quiet hum she sometimes sang as she worked, a melody that brought an unexpected warmth to the otherwise silent house. He found himself lingering in the kitchen a moment longer after meals, a silent appreciation for the nourishing food and the quiet, dignified presence of the woman who prepared it. He felt a quiet satisfaction in having provided her with this respite, a small defiance against the cruelty that had driven her here. This wasn't just about hiring a cook. It was about offering a chance at something new, something hopeful. And in return, the ranch felt a little more like a home. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Emma stood by the creek, watching the water flow. The harsh edges of her grief were softening, replaced by a quiet resilience. She was still bruised, still scarred, but the seeds of a new beginning had been sown. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt a fragile sense of peace. The ranch, with its stern, silent owner, was slowly but surely becoming her refuge.
Hands that heal. The morning air at Nathan's ranch carried a new blend of scents, the sharp tang of wood smoke and the sweet promise of baked bread, now interweaving with the familiar earthiness of horse and hay.
It was a subtle transformation, yet one he registered each day stepping from his cabin. Emma, true to her promise, had embraced her new responsibilities with a quiet efficiency that continued to surprise him. She was a pre-dawn wraith, stoking the kitchen fire and crafting breakfasts that imbued the small house with a comforting warmth. He'd discovered her one afternoon, not in the bustling kitchen as anticipated, but among the corrals. Buster, his most venerable and ill-tempered gelding, typically shied from all but Nathan himself, yet there Emma stood, murmuring soft endearments to the old horse, stroking his muzzle with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm. Buster's ears, usually flattened in suspicion, were now pricked forward, almost attentive. The scene struck Nathan profoundly. Those same hands, capable of kneading dough with surprising vigor, now wielded a different sort of power with the animals. He hadn't fully grasped how much the ranch had yearned for a feminine touch, a reassuring presence that softened the rugged edges of its existence. Emma's days unfolded in a steady cadence of chores. The small cabin he'd provided her now gleamed, its rough-hewn walls fragrant with pine and beeswax, not dust. She prepared simple, nourishing meals, her stews and roasted meats a welcome respite from his often charred attempts. He'd catch glimpses of her, a low, tuneless hum accompanying her as she hung laundry on the line, sunlight catching the auburn tendrils of her hair. A quiet dignity marked her every movement, a resilience hinting at past battles won, even amidst the most mundane tasks. One evening, after a long day mending fences, Nathan found himself at the small kitchen table, savoring a slice of her apple pie. The silence between them felt different now, no longer empty, but a comfortable space shared. Emma sat opposite him, deftly mending a tear in one of his work shirts, her head bowed, lamplight painting a soft glow on her face. He observed her nimble fingers, the way they threaded the needle with practiced ease, a faint scar visible on her left wrist. He wondered about its origin, about the stories those hands could tell. "You're good with the horses, Emma," he stated, breaking the stillness. She looked up, her blue eyes meeting his, a flicker of surprise in their depths. "They're honest creatures, Mr. Cole. They just need a bit of understanding." "Nathan," he corrected gently. "And they respond to you." He paused, then added, "Buster hasn't been that calm with anyone else in years." A small, genuine smile touched her lips, transforming her face. "He's a sweetheart, really. Just needs a bit of reassurance." He found himself wanting to see that smile more often. The ranch, once a bastion of solitary labor, was subtly, gradually awakening. The very air felt lighter. He'd catch himself whistling as he rode the pastures, a habit long forgotten. He even began to notice the wildflowers blooming along the creek bed, their vibrant hues mirroring the quiet blossoming within his own home. Her presence was a gentle balm. He hadn't realized the profound depth of the quiet he'd grown accustomed to. Now, a faint murmur of activity drifted from the main house, the clinking of pots, the soft cadence of her voice. It was a gentle invasion, one he not only tolerated, but actively welcomed. He'd always prided himself on independence, on self-sufficiency, but Emma's quiet fortitude, her unwavering diligence, steadily chipped away at his stoic exterior. He felt drawn to the unspoken narratives in her eyes, the resilience etched into her delicate features. He had offered her refuge, a safe harbor, but he was beginning to understand she was offering him something in return, something he hadn't known he lacked. The ranch was mending, and so, perhaps, was he. Shared shadows and silent promises. The scent of pine and freshly baked bread mingled in the air, a domestic symphony that had become the unexpected backdrop to Emma's tentative confessions. They sat by the crackling fire, the only light in the living room, casting long, dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. The evening had settled into a comfortable quiet after supper, a quiet broken only by the occasional pop of burning wood. Emma found herself tracing the rim of her empty teacup, a nervous habit she hadn't realized she still possessed. "My husband, he wasn't a kind man," she began, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the robust crackle of the fire. The words felt foreign on her tongue, heavy with years of unspoken pain. She risked a glance at Nathan. He sat opposite her, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the flames, but she knew he was listening, truly listening. "His brothers, they were worse," she continued, a tremor entering her voice. "After he died, they took everything, the farm, the livestock, even my mother's locket." Her fingers instinctively went to her throat, finding only bare skin where the familiar silver chain should have been. A wave of cold shame washed over her, the memory of her helplessness, the casual cruelty of it all, still raw. "They said I had no claim, that a woman had no right to anything if her husband was gone and there were male heirs." Nathan remained silent, his profile stark against the flickering light. Yet in that stillness, Emma felt an anchor. There was no pity in his gaze when he finally turned it towards her, no judgment. Only a profound, steady presence that seemed to absorb the jagged edges of her fear. "I tried to fight," she confessed, the words spilling out faster now, a dam slowly breaking. "I went to the sheriff, but he just laughed, told me to accept my lot, said I was lucky they didn't turn me out with nothing but the clothes on my back." Her voice cracked, the humiliation of that memory still stinging. "I had to run. They would have kept me there, working like a slave until I had nothing left." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, until she was broken, discarded. She shivered, despite the warmth of the fire. Nathan shifted, a slight movement, but Emma felt the subtle shift in the air, a tightening. His jaw was set, a muscle ticking near his temple. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a controlled anger that was not directed at her, but at the injustice she described. It was a potent, almost tangible force, and surprisingly, it was comforting. "I'm not a fool, Nathan," she said, looking directly at him, her voice finding a newfound strength. "I know what it looks like. A woman alone, a widow, with nothing but a few belongings and a story. People talk. They always do." Her gaze dropped to her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. I needed work, honest work, a place where I wouldn't be judged or exploited." The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't empty or oppressive. It was a space being filled, not with words, but with understanding. Nathan reached out, not to touch her, but to stoke the dying embers of the fire, sending a shower of sparks dancing upwards. The simple, deliberate action spoke volumes. It was a quiet act of tending, of care. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rough, like stones shifting in a riverbed. "You're safe here, Emma." It wasn't a question, nor was it a suggestion. It was a statement of fact, imbued with an unwavering conviction. His eyes, dark and steady, met hers across the flickering light. In their depths, she saw not just a promise of shelter, but a deeper, unspoken vow, a vow of protection, of standing firm against the shadows that had chased her. A profound sense of relief washed over Emma, so intense it made her lightheaded. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps never, not truly. A safety that reached beyond the physical, settling deep into the bruised corners of her soul. She hadn't known how desperately she craved it until this moment. The quiet strength emanating from Nathan was a bulwark against a world that had, for too long, felt hostile and unforgiving. Here, in the heart of his home, by the warmth of his fire, she felt a fragile hope begin to bloom. The past was a cruel tether, but in Nathan's silent promise, she saw the faint outline of a future. Laughter in the dust. The late afternoon sun, a painter's brushstroke of orange and gold, spilled across the kitchen, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Emma, humming a low tune, was kneading dough for biscuits, her movements rhythmic and practiced. Nathan, having just come in from mending a fence, leaned against the doorframe, a faint smile playing on his lips as he watched her. He'd intended to grab a cup of coffee and head back out, but the quiet domesticity held him. Suddenly, a series of muffled thuds and a loud clang echoed from outside. Emma's hands stilled, a worried crease forming between her brows. Nathan pushed off the frame, his expression shifting to one of mild annoyance. "Sounds like old man Hemlock's prize pig got into the feed again," he grumbled, shaking his head. "That beast has a nose for trouble like no other." He strode out, and Emma, curiosity piqued, followed him to the porch. What they saw sent a ripple of laughter bubbling up from Emma's chest. The pig, a magnificent mud-spattered specimen, had indeed overturned a barrel of oats, now rolling gleefully in the spilled grain, completely oblivious to the chaos it had created. Nathan stood, hands on his hips, a picture of exasperated defeat. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, trying to keep a straight face, but a flicker of amusement danced in his eyes. Emma's laughter, light and unburdened, floated on the breeze. It was the first time he'd heard her truly laugh, a sound that seemed to chase away the shadows that had clung to her. He found himself smiling back, a genuine, unguarded smile that softened the rugged lines of his face. Later that evening, after the pig had been coaxed back into its pen and the oats salvaged, they sat on the porch, the air cool and fragrant with the scent of pine. The conversation, once strictly professional, had begun to meander into more personal territory. Emma found herself recounting a humorous anecdote from her childhood, a mischievous prank she'd played on a stern aunt. Nathan listened intently, his gaze warm and steady, occasionally interjecting with a chuckle or a thoughtful question. "You know," he said, breaking a comfortable silence, "it's different. having someone else around. Not just for the work, but... He trailed off, searching for the right words. It's good. The house feels less empty. Emma's heart fluttered. She understood. The silence of the ranch, once a comfort to Nathan, had also been a cloak for his solitude. And for her, the quiet domesticity of preparing meals, mending clothes, and simply existing in a safe space was a balm. "It's good for me too, Nathan," she replied softly, her voice barely a whisper. "More than good. It's peace." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon, where the last vestiges of sunset painted the sky in hues of purple and deep indigo. The unspoken understanding stretched between them, a delicate thread weaving their lives together. He saw the strength in her quiet determination, the resilience beneath her gentle demeanor. She saw the deep kindness in his stoic exterior, the unwavering protectiveness that had quickly become her anchor. Their interactions became less about tasks and more about shared moments, a shared glance over a particularly stubborn stain on a shirt, a conspiratorial smile when the barn cat, Barnaby, attempted to steal a biscuit from the counter, a quiet discussion about the changing seasons. The ranch, once a solitary expanse, was slowly but surely becoming a home, not just for Nathan, but for Emma too. A quiet light began to grow between them, a warmth that radiated from their shared space, unnoticed by the world beyond the ranch fences, but keenly felt by both of them. It was a fragile, budding thing, born of shared laughter and unspoken understanding, rooted in kindness and nurtured by the promise of safety. Emma, for the first time in years, felt a stir of hope, a gentle whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, she might finally be free to truly live. And Nathan, watching her, felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was missing. The world outside might be harsh, but within the walls of his home, a new chapter was slowly, beautifully unfolding. Whispers in town. The creak of the mercantile door, usually a friendly sound, now seemed to carry a weight of hushed whispers. Emma felt it first, a subtle shift in the air whenever she and Nathan stepped into Harmony Creek. Eyes, once merely curious, now lingered a moment too long, darting away when caught. Heads would incline together, words exchanged behind cupped hands, and then silence, thick and sudden, would descend as they passed. It started innocently enough, a murmured question from Mrs. Gable about the new help at Nathan's place, quickly followed by a knowing glance at her daughter. Then came Mr. Henderson's pointed inquiry to Nathan about whether Emma was proving worth her salt, his gaze drifting to Emma's modest but clean calico dress. The whispers grew bolder, fueled by the small town's insatiable appetite for novelty and its ingrained suspicion of anything outside the established order. A young, beautiful widow, alone, working for the reclusive Nathan Cole? It was a story ripe for invention. Nathan, for his part, seemed oblivious at first, his focus solely on Emma and their shared tasks. But even his stoic demeanor couldn't entirely shield him from the pervasive hum. He noticed the way the general store proprietor, usually garrulous, now spoke in clipped tones to Emma, barely meeting her eyes.
He saw the cluster of women outside the church disperse awkwardly as Emma approached, their conversation dying on their lips.
A slow burn of irritation, cold and resolute, began to simmer beneath his calm exterior. One afternoon, while Nathan was haggling over feed prices with Silas Thorne, he overheard a snatch of conversation from two women by the dry goods barrels. "Such a shame," one clucked, "a woman like that, all alone. And Nathan, well, he's always been one for keeping to himself." The other woman lowered her voice conspiratorially. "They say she's quite taken with him, and him, well, he's never had a woman under his roof before, not like this." A muscle in Nathan's jaw tightened. He turned slowly, his gaze pinning the women. Their hushed voices died instantly, their faces flushing. He didn't say a word, just held their stare until they averted their eyes, clutching their bolts of fabric a little tighter. The message was clear. He heard them. Later that week, as they were leaving the mercantile, a group of young men loitering near the hitching post snickered. One of them, a lanky youth named Billy, called out, "Say, Cole, got yourself a pretty little housekeeper, eh? Mind if we come by for supper sometime?" Nathan stopped dead, the reins in his hand tightening. Emma, walking beside him, flinched, her cheeks coloring. She knew what supper implied in their tone. Nathan's eyes, usually as still as a winter pond, now held the dangerous glint of ice breaking. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Emma and the gawking men. "You'd do well to mind your tongue, Billy." Nathan's voice was low, devoid of heat, yet it carried a chilling authority that silenced the group. "Mrs. Vale is a decent woman, working hard and honest. Any man who suggests otherwise will answer to me." Billy's bravado crumpled. He mumbled an apology, his gaze fixed on his worn boots. Nathan held his stare for another long moment before turning back to Emma. He offered her his arm, a gesture he hadn't made before, and led her to the buckboard. The townspeople, witnessing the exchange, quickly dispersed, their whispers momentarily stifled by the sharp display of Nathan's loyalty. As they rode back to the ranch, the silence in the buckboard was different. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of shared understanding, but one laced with the lingering sting of public scrutiny. Emma kept her gaze fixed on the passing fields, but a warmth spread through her chest. Nathan hadn't just defended her, he had claimed her, in a way, against the judgmental tide of the town. His unwavering loyalty, his quiet fury on her behalf, was a shield she hadn't realized she so desperately needed. It was a tangible anchor in the turbulent sea of her new, uncertain life. The whispers might continue, but with Nathan standing firm, they no longer felt quite so sharp, quite so isolating. She was no longer truly alone. The crisp morning air, redolent with pine and damp earth, was a balm to Emma's spirit, a scent she now equated with serenity. A genuine smile, one that reached her eyes and etched fine lines at the corners, had become a frequent visitor to her lips. Her steps, once burdened by unspoken anxieties, now moved with an unburdened lightness, almost a spring, as she went about her tasks. The fear that had been her constant shadow for so long had begun to dissipate, replaced by a tender, nascent hope. It began subtly in the quietest moments. Watching Nathan mend a fence, his movements economical and strong, she found herself envisioning a future where such simple acts were not merely temporary respite, but the bedrock of a permanent existence. A future where the vast expanse of the ranch offered not just refuge, but a true home. She pictured herself nurturing a small garden, its vibrant hues a bold rebellion against the muted grays of her past. She saw herself sharing meals at the sturdy kitchen table, not as an employee, but as an equal, a partner. This thought, initially a fleeting fancy, had solidified into a quiet conviction. Here she could find safety. Here she could flourish. One afternoon, as she helped Nathan with a stack of invoices in his study, a sunbeam pierced the window, illuminating a ballet of dust motes. She looked up, catching Nathan's gaze upon her. A softness resided there, a contemplative depth she hadn't noticed, stirring a warmth within her. He cleared his throat, returning to the papers, but the moment lingered, electric and profound. Later that evening, after a hearty supper of stew and fresh-baked bread, Nathan stared into the fireplace's flickering flames, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. From the kitchen, Emma hummed softly as she tidied, her simple, sweet melody weaving into the quiet living room, intertwining with his thoughts. For the longest time, his future had been a solitary landscape, vast and unchanging. He had accepted it, even embraced it, as his unalterable lot. But now the topography was shifting. Emma had introduced color, warmth, and a gentle rhythm he hadn't realized was absent. He saw her face in the fire's glow, her genuine smile, the way her eyes sparkled with laughter. He imagined her settled here permanently, her presence filling the silent corners of his life. He pictured evenings just like this, but instead of silence, there would be conversation, shared thoughts, perhaps even laughter. He saw himself riding the fence lines, secure in the knowledge of her awaiting his return. He envisioned a shared life, a partnership that transcended the bounds of rancher and employee. It was a startling revelation, this sudden clarity. A life with Emma. The words settled in his mind, not as a strange foreign concept, but as something profoundly right, something he now yearned for with surprising intensity. The protective instinct he'd felt towards her had deepened, evolving into something richer, more profound. He desired not merely to shield her from harm, but to construct a world where harm couldn't reach her. A world where she belonged, utterly and completely, by his side. The humming from the kitchen ceased, and Emma appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Everything's put away, Nathan," she said, her voice soft. He looked up, his gaze lingering. The flickering firelight burnished her hair to spun copper. A tremor ran through him, a mixture of hope and a profound yearning he couldn't quite name. He wanted to tell her, to lay bare the sudden, vivid pictures forming in his mind, but the words eluded him, caught in his throat. "Good," he managed, his voice a little rougher than intended. He took a sip of his coffee, its warmth a welcome diversion from the sudden heat in his face. Emma offered a small smile, then bid him good night and disappeared down the hallway to her room. Nathan remained by the fire, her image, and the burgeoning dream of their shared future burning brightly in his mind. The solitude of his life had been broken, not by an intrusion, but by an invitation he was ready to accept. The shadow on the horizon. The late afternoon sun, usually a welcome presence on the ranch, now stretched long, distorted shadows across the fields, painting the familiar landscape in an unsettling new light. On the porch, Emma diligently mended a tear in one of Nathan's work shirts, the needle's rhythmic pull a quiet counterpoint to the ranch's hushed cadence. The air hung still, rich with the scent of dry grass and distant pine. It was a perfect, cherished moment, one of many that had bloomed since her arrival, promising a future she'd once deemed unattainable. Her gaze, momentarily lifting from her painstaking work, snagged on a distant point at the horizon. A faint smudge, barely discernible against the deepening gold of the sky, slowly resolved into a solitary rider, starkly silhouetted against the sun's descent. The horse, nearly absorbing the light, was dark, as was the cloaked figure atop it. An inexplicable shiver snaked down Emma's spine. It wasn't the evening chill. The air remained warm. This was something deeper, a discordant note marring the afternoon's harmony. Her hands froze, needle poised mid-stitch. A familiar dread, dormant for months, began to coil within her. It was the same icy grip that had tightened around her heart when her husband's brothers delivered the news of his death, the same sickening premonition that had whispered of betrayal and ruin. She couldn't pinpoint why this distant, anonymous figure ignited such a potent, visceral fear, yet it was undeniably there, a cold, uninvited presence. Nathan emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He paused, his eyes following Emma's fixed stare, his brow furrowed. Though the rider remained unseen by him, he registered the sudden rigidity in Emma's posture, the stark white of her knuckles clutching the shirt. He moved to the edge of the porch, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "What is it, Emma?" His voice was a low rumble of concern. She didn't answer immediately, her breath catching in her throat. The rider was closer now, still too far for discernible features, yet the sheer presence of the figure, its unhurried, purposeful advance, sent a fresh wave of apprehension through her. It felt predatory, like a shadow lengthening before an imminent storm. "There," she whispered, her hand trembling as she pointed. "The rider." Nathan squinted, his vision sharper than hers. He saw the dark horse, the dark, cloaked form. There was an arrogance in the rider's posture, even at this distance, that pricked at his own burgeoning unease. This wasn't a neighbor, nor a passing ranch hand. This felt different. A tightening in his chest prefaced a nascent anger. He'd witnessed Emma's blossoming here, seen her shed the layers of sorrow and fear that had clung to her like a shroud. He'd seen the light rekindle in her eyes, her quiet strength reassert itself. He wouldn't stand idly by and watch that light dim again. "I don't like the looks of that," Nathan muttered, more to himself than to Emma. His hand instinctively found the rifle leaning against the porch post, its familiar weight a comfort. He didn't raise it, not yet, but his fingers rested on the cool wood. The rider continued to approach, the rhythmic thud of hooves now barely audible on the still air. Each step seemed to deepen the shadow that stretched before them, a dark tendril reaching across the land. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her past, she realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't merely a memory to be overcome. It was a living, breathing entity riding towards her on a black horse, ready to reclaim its due. The sanctuary Nathan had so generously offered, the fragile peace she had found, felt suddenly exposed, vulnerable. Nathan watched the approaching figure, his jaw tight. While he hadn't been privy to the gossip that swirled through Harmony Creek when Emma first arrived, he'd heard snippets since, whispers of a complicated past, of a life stripped bare. He hadn't cared then, only caring about the quiet dignity he saw in her, the honest work she sought. Now, looking at the ominous figure, a protective fury ignited within him. He didn't know who this was or what they wanted, but he knew with a chilling certainty that it meant trouble for Emma. And if it meant trouble for Emma, it meant trouble for him.
Bartholomew's return. The solitary rider, now closer, resolved from a blur into a stark, terrifying silhouette against the afternoon sun. He rode a black stallion, its hooves kicking up plumes of dust that swirled like malevolent spirits. The cloak, once ambiguous, was undeniably dark, its fabric heavy and ominous. Emma's breath hitched, a cold dread seizing her. The figure dismounted with an arrogant flourish, his movements eerily familiar. A gasp escaped Emma's lips, a thin, reedy sound lost in the sudden thrumming in her ears. The man pushed back his hood, revealing a face etched into her deepest nightmares. Bartholomew Vale, her supposedly dead husband. His eyes, the color of tarnished brass, swept over her, a predatory glint in their depths. A cruel smile twisted his lips, a smile that had always promised pain and dominion. He had grown a beard, thick and dark, but it did little to disguise the sharp angles of his face or the cold authority in his gaze. He wore fine, tailored clothes, a stark contrast to the dust of the road, and the expensive leather of his riding gloves creaked as he flexed his fingers. He looked wealthier, harder, and infinitely more dangerous than she remembered. "Emma," he purred, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down her spine. It was a sound she had once believed she would never hear again, a sound that now resurrected every moment of fear and subjugation she had endured. "Fancy meeting you here, running errands for a new benefactor, I presume." His eyes flicked to Nathan, who had stepped forward, a hand instinctively resting on the hilt of his holstered pistol. Nathan's jaw tightened. He had been aware of the approaching rider, but had dismissed him as just another traveler. Now, witnessing Emma's palpable terror and Bartholomew's venomous gaze, a primal protective instinct surged through him. He had seen that look before, the possessive snarl of a wolf eyeing its prey. "She works for me," Nathan stated, his voice calm but infused with an iron edge. "And she's not running errands. She's an honest woman earning an honest living." Bartholomew's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. "Honest? Emma, that's rich coal. This woman is my wife, my property, and she's coming home with me." His gaze burned into Emma, demanding obedience, promising retribution. Emma felt the blood drain from her face, her knees threatening to buckle. The world tilted, the familiar sights of Harmony Creek blurring into a grotesque tableau. Bartholomew was alive. The man she had mourned, the man whose alleged death had freed her from a life of torment, stood before her, a living embodiment of her worst fears. The freedom she had tentatively embraced, the hope she had nurtured,
shattered into a million pieces. I thought you were dead," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The accusation hung in the air, a desperate plea for understanding, a fragile protest against the monstrous deception. Bartholomew's smile vanished, replaced by a sneer. "Did you now? And were you so eager to be rid of me, Emma? So quick to forget your vows?" He took a menacing step towards her, and Emma instinctively recoiled, bumping into Nathan's solid form. Nathan's arm went around her shoulders, a silent anchor in her storm of terror. He felt her trembling, the frantic beat of her heart against his arm. His anger, a slow-burning ember, flared into a protective inferno. "She's not going anywhere with you," Nathan declared, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He pulled Emma slightly behind him, shielding her from Bartholomew's gaze. "You have no claim here." Bartholomew's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint igniting within them. "Oh, I have every claim, Cole. She is legally my wife."
"And what is mine, I always take back." He swept a dismissive hand towards Nathan. "You're just a rancher playing hero. This is none of your concern." "It is now," Nathan retorted, his grip on Emma's shoulder tightening reassuringly. He met Bartholomew's gaze unflinchingly, a silent challenge passing between them. The air crackled with unspoken threats, the promise of violence hanging heavy. For Emma, the nightmare had truly begun. The confrontation. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable tension that raised goosebumps on Nathan's arms. Bartholomew's gaze, sharp and predatory, swept over Emma, a proprietary gleam sparking in their depths that knotted Nathan's jaw. "She is mine," Bartholomew snarled, his voice a guttural rumble laced with an undeniable menace. "Always has been. Always will be." Nathan stepped forward, a bulwark between Emma and the man asserting ownership. His own voice, though softly spoken, held an unyielding resolve, cutting through the sudden hush. "She belongs to no one, Vale, least of all to you." It was a gauntlet thrown, and the townsfolk, clustered in a hushed semicircle, collectively caught their breath. Bartholomew's features twisted, arrogant sneer contorting into a mask of rage. "You dare defy me, rancher? You dare interfere between a man and his wife?" He gesticulated wildly, his eyes raking over the assembled faces. "This woman," he boomed, voice echoing, "is a deceitful harlot. She fled from me, claiming my demise, only to bed down with the first man who offered her shelter." A ripple of low murmurs spread through the crowd. Nathan felt Emma flinch behind him, her breath hitching. He knew the seeds of doubt were taking root, the fragile piece of Emma's new life threatening to shatter. He could almost feel the weight of their judgment, the swiftness with which idle talk could transform a newcomer into an outcast. "He lies," Emma whispered, her voice quivering but resolute. "He was cruel, abusive. He left me destitute." Bartholomew scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "A convenient fabrication, wouldn't you agree? Especially when a wealthy rancher provides comfort. She's a mercenary, a fabricator, a schemer. She's exploited me, and now she's exploiting you, Cole." He pointed a scornful finger at Nathan. "She'll drain you dry, then move on to the next unwitting fool." The words stung, not because Nathan credited them, but because he saw the way some townspeople nodded, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. He could practically taste the silent condemnations forming. Bartholomew was a master puppeteer, weaving a tapestry of lies designed to isolate Emma, to brand her a pariah, making her easier to reclaim.
Nathan clenched his fists, stifling the urge to silence Bartholomew with brute force. He knew violence would only validate Bartholomew's assertions, painting Nathan as a hot-headed brute defending a fallen woman. He needed to be strategic, unyielding in his conviction.
"I know, Emma," Nathan declared, his voice resonating with an unwavering certainty. "And I recognize deceit when I hear it." He turned slightly, meeting the gazes of the onlookers. "She arrived in Harmony Creek seeking honest labor, a fresh start. She has proven herself a woman of integrity and courage. The only one peddling falsehoods here is you, Vale." Bartholomew's eyes, already aflame, now promised retribution. "You will regret this, Cole. You will regret meddling with what is rightfully mine." He advanced, invading Nathan's personal space, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "She belongs to me, and if you obstruct my path, you will suffer the repercussions." Nathan met his gaze unflinchingly.
This was it, the crucible. He could step aside, allow Bartholomew to reclaim Emma, and avoid the maelstrom of scandal and legal wrangling that would undoubtedly ensue. He could safeguard his standing, his land, his tranquil existence. Or he could hold his ground, publicly pledging his allegiance to Emma, knowing it would plunge them both into an uncertain, perilous future. The choice, in truth, was no choice at all. Emma had found sanctuary with him, a fragile glimmer of hope for a new beginning. He would not betray that trust, not now, not ever. He would not allow Bartholomew to shatter her again. The thought of Emma being dragged back into that nightmare, broken and dispossessed once more, was unbearable. He looked at Emma, her eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and a nascent hope. He saw the silent plea, the desperate yearning for someone to believe in her, to shield her. And in that moment, the path ahead, though fraught with danger, became brilliantly clear. He would champion her. He would stand by her, whatever the sacrifice. "She is not leaving with you, Vale," Nathan said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that momentarily silenced even Bartholomew. "Not now, not ever. This is her haven now, and you, sir, are no longer welcome here." A public stand. The townsfolk's low hum swelled, yet Nathan's gaze remained locked on Bartholomew. "Emma Vale is a free woman," he stated, his voice slicing through the rising clamor, "and she is under my protection." A collective gasp rippled across the square. He sensed Emma's fear, a faint tremor from behind him, but his stance held firm. Nathan met Bartholomew's sneering challenge with a steely resolve that surprised even himself. This wasn't about legalities anymore. It was about Emma, the quiet strength he'd come to admire, the peace she'd brought to his solitary existence. Bartholomew's laugh grated, a harsh, rusty sound. "Protection? From what, Cole?" "From her own sins?" He gestured wildly at the crowd, his words a venomous spray. "This harlot fled her rightful husband, stole from his kin, and now seeks refuge with a fool like you." Nathan's jaw tightened.
He ignored the whispers and the averted eyes. He saw Mrs. Henderson's face etched with pity, Silas's with dawning respect, but most displayed a morbid curiosity tinged with judgment. "She stole nothing," Nathan countered, his voice low, yet carrying a lethal edge. "And she is no harlot. She is a good woman, and she has earned her place here, earned my respect." He took a deliberate step forward, subtly interposing himself between Emma and Bartholomew. "You have no claim on her. She is not your property." Bartholomew's features contorted into a mask of fury. "She is my wife, and you backwater rancher, will learn to mind your own business." He lunged forward, his hand instinctively dropping to the heavy pistol at his hip. The motion was fluid, practiced. The crowd recoiled, a collective intake of breath. A sudden hush fell, broken only by uneasy shuffling. The sun, previously warm, now cast a harsher glare, illuminating the dancing dust motes. Every eye was on the two men, and the woman silently sheltered behind one. Nathan's hand, as if by instinct, found the worn grip of his own Colt. He didn't draw it, not yet, but the implied threat hung heavy. He wouldn't be cowed. Years of quiet solitude, battling elements and managing his land, had forged an unyielding core within him. He'd faced cougars and rustlers. This man, for all his bluster and fine clothes, was just another threat to be neutralized. "Walk away, Bartholomew," Nathan commanded, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet ringing with authority. "Walk away now, and this ends here." Bartholomew's cold, calculating eyes flickered between Nathan's face and his hand on the pistol. He was a man accustomed to dominance, to wielding power through intimidation and wealth. But Nathan Cole possessed a raw, untamed quality Bartholomew hadn't anticipated. "You think you can defy me, Cole?" Bartholomew sneered, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. "You think you can protect this runaway from me?" "I know I can," Nathan stated, his gaze unwavering. "And I will. She is not leaving with you. Not now, not ever." A muscle twitched in Bartholomew's jaw. He was caught between his pride and the very real possibility of a gunfight in the town square, with witnesses. He was a wealthy man, not a desperado. Such a scene, even if he won, would be messy, attracting unwelcome attention. But to back down from this rugged country bumpkin, the tension was a palpable thing, thick and heavy, pressing down on everyone. A child's cry was quickly hushed by its mother. The air vibrated with unspoken challenges, with the potential for violence. Nathan felt Emma's small, trembling hand touch his back. He didn't look at her, but the contact reaffirmed his resolve. He would protect her, no matter the cost. He was ready. Bartholomew slowly, deliberately, removed his hand from his pistol. "This isn't over, Cole," he hissed, his eyes blazing with a promise of future retribution. "You will regret this." He cast a final, hateful glance at Emma, then spun on his heel and stalked away, his expensive boots kicking up dust as he headed towards the livery stable. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the townsfolk. The immediate danger had passed, but the air still crackled with the confrontation's aftermath. Nathan remained standing, his hand still on his gun, watching Bartholomew until the man was out of sight.
Only then did he turn to Emma. Her face was pale, but her eyes, wide and luminous, held a mixture of fear, relief, and something more, something akin to awe. He hadn't asked for her trust, hadn't asked for her devotion, but in that moment, before the entire town's judgment and Bartholomew's threats, he had unequivocally given her his. Freedom found. The scent of stale pipe tobacco and aged paper permeated Judge Thorne's office, a comforting contrast to the recent stench of fear that had clung to Emma. Nathan sat beside her, a solid, unyielding presence, his hand resting on her knee beneath the table, a private anchor in a public storm. Judge Thorne, a man whose silver hair matched the keenness of his eyes, slowly reread the affidavits, his brow furrowed in concentration. Bartholomew Vale stood opposite them, radiating an arrogant confidence that grated on Emma's nerves. He leaned against the polished oak desk, a sneer playing on his lips, as if the legal proceedings were a mere formality before his inevitable triumph. "Mr. Vale," Judge Thorne began, his voice calm but firm, "your claim hinges on the fact that Mrs. Vale is legally your wife, and therefore bound to your will. Is that correct?" Bartholomew pushed off the desk, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "Precisely, Judge. She's my property, despite her attempts to run off with this rancher." His gaze flickered to Nathan, a challenge in its depths. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, trusting the judge. Emma felt a shiver of dread. How could she possibly escape this man's grasp when the law, as she understood it, seemed to favor him? Judge Thorne steepened his gaze, ignoring Bartholomew's provocative tone. "And your assertion that she abandoned you, Mr. Vale?" "She ran away like a common thief, Judge. Left me for dead, she did, and absconded with my belongings. A wife's duty is to her husband." The judge leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Indeed, a wife's duty. But what of a husband's duty, Mr. Vale?" "To provide, to protect, to not abandon his wife to fend for herself in a desolate territory, leaving her no means of communication or support for over a year, believing him deceased?" Bartholomew's smug expression faltered. "I was indisposed, held captive by circumstances." Judge Thorne's dry wit emerged. "Circumstances that apparently prevented you from sending a single letter, a telegram, or even a messenger to inform your wife of your continued existence, much less your whereabouts or intentions. For over a year, Mr. Vale. And during that year, Mrs. Vale, believing herself a widow, built a new life, established herself, and sought to support herself through honest labor." A flicker of hope ignited in Emma's chest. Nathan's grip on her knee tightened, a silent reassurance. "The statute regarding abandonment," Judge Thorne continued, pulling a thick leather-bound book closer, "stipulates that if a spouse, without just cause, deserts their partner for a continuous period of 12 months or more and shows no intent to return or provide support, the deserted spouse may petition for a dissolution of the marital bond." He looked directly at Bartholomew. "You left Mrs. Vale in a precarious position, without word or resource, for a period exceeding this statutory requirement. Her belief in your demise, though mistaken, was a direct consequence of your prolonged and unexplained absence." Bartholomew spluttered, his face reddening. "But I returned. I'm here now. That negates any abandonment."
Your return, Mr. Vale, does not retroactively erase the year of your disappearance, the judge stated, his voice unwavering. The abandonment occurred, and the legal period was fulfilled. Furthermore, Mrs.
Vale was under the reasonable impression that you had passed away, allowing her to make decisions regarding her future, decisions which, in this court's opinion, were both logical and necessary for her survival. A profound stillness settled in the room. Emma held her breath, her gaze fixed on Judge Thorne. Nathan's hand, usually so firm, trembled slightly on her knee.
Therefore, Judge Thorne concluded, his voice resonating with authority, considering the undisputed facts of Mr. Vale's prolonged and uncommunicated absence, and Mrs. Vale's reasonable belief in his death and subsequent establishment of a new, independent life, I rule that Emma Vale is legally free from the marital claims of Bartholomew Vale. The bond is hereby dissolved, effective immediately. The words echoed in Emma's ears, each syllable a hammer blow to the chains that had bound her. Freedom. True, legal, irrefutable freedom. A wave of dizziness washed over her, a dizzying mix of relief and disbelief.
She felt light, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her shoulders, her vision blurred with unshed tears. Bartholomew roared, a guttural sound of pure outrage. "This is an outrage! You can't do this!" Nathan, finally releasing Emma's knee, stood slowly, his towering presence casting a shadow over the furious Bartholomew. "The judge just did, Vale. She's free. Get out." His voice was low, dangerous, a growl that promised violence if Bartholomew dared to push further. Emma looked up at Nathan, her heart swelling with an emotion so profound it bordered on pain. Awe, gratitude, love. He had stood by her, protected her, and now he had helped secure her future. She was truly safe, truly her own person, and it was all thanks to him. The world, which had felt so small and constricted, suddenly stretched out before her, vast and full of possibility. She reached out, her hand finding Nathan's, holding on as if to ground herself in this unbelievable new reality. Choosing love. Emma stood before the judge, the words "marriage dissolved" echoing in the quiet courtroom. A wave of profound relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. Bartholomew, a picture of impotent fury, glared at the judge, then at her, his jaw working. But his threats, his claims, his very presence now held no legal weight. She was free, truly, unequivocally free. Her gaze drifted past the seething figure of her former husband, past the curious faces of the townsfolk packed into the small room, and landed on Nathan. He stood a little apart from the rest, his presence a solid, unyielding anchor in the swirling aftermath of the verdict. His eyes, usually reserved, held a warmth that spoke volumes, a silent promise of protection and unwavering support. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of her past and the burgeoning hope of her future, Emma knew with absolute certainty that her heart belonged to him, completely and irrevocably. A soft, involuntary smile touched her lips. Nathan returned the smile, a subtle curve of his mouth that somehow reached his eyes, chasing away the lingering shadow of tension from his rugged features. He moved then, a deliberate, unhurried stride that drew every eye in the courtroom. Bartholomew, still simmering, watched him approach, a snarl twisting his face. "This ain't over, Cole," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "You think you've won? This ain't over." Nathan didn't even glance at him. His focus was solely on Emma. He reached her, his hand extending, strong and calloused. Without a moment's hesitation, Emma placed her trembling hand in his. The warmth of his touch spread through her, chasing away the last vestiges of fear, replacing it with a comforting certainty. His fingers closed around hers, a firm, possessive grip that left no room for doubt. This wasn't just a gesture, it was a declaration. In front of Judge Thorne, in front of the entire town of Havenwood, in front of the man who had once claimed to own her, Nathan Cole publicly chose her. The air in the courtroom, thick with anticipation and hushed whispers, seemed to hold its breath. A palpable ripple went through the onlookers as they witnessed the silent, powerful exchange. Mrs. Henderson, usually reserved, let out a soft gasp. Mr. Abernathy, the general store owner, nodded slowly, a knowing look on his face. Even Sheriff Brody, who had seen his share of drama, watched with a quiet intensity. The town, once rife with gossip and speculation about Emma's past and her connection to Nathan, now saw the undeniable truth laid bare. This was not a casual arrangement. This was a bond forged in adversity, a promise made without words. Bartholomew, witnessing their joined hands, let out a guttural growl, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. You can't," he choked out, taking a step forward. "She's mine. She always will be." Nathan finally turned his gaze to Bartholomew, and the sheer force of his glare stopped Bartholomew in his tracks. There was no anger, no triumph in Nathan's eyes, only a cold, unyielding resolve that promised swift and decisive consequences should Bartholomew dare to interfere again. "She is free," Nathan stated, his voice low, but carrying an undeniable authority that silenced the courtroom. "And she is with me." He didn't need to say more. The message was clear. Emma was no longer a possession, no longer a victim. She was a woman, legally unbound, and choosing her own path, with Nathan by her side. Leaving Bartholomew sputtering in his wake, Nathan gently guided Emma from the courtroom. The townsfolk parted to let them pass, their expressions a mixture of surprise, understanding, and a dawning respect. Emma felt a lightness in her step she hadn't known in years. With Nathan's hand securely in hers, she felt invincible. As they stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the sunlight felt brighter, the sky bluer. The world, once shadowed by fear and uncertainty, now gleamed with possibility. She looked up at Nathan, her heart overflowing. "Nathan," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." He squeezed her hand. "There's nothing to thank me for, Emma. This is where you belong." They walked in comfortable silence, their footsteps echoing softly on the dusty path leading away from the courthouse. The town, with its curious glances and whispered conjectures, faded into the background. For the first time in what felt like forever,
Emma could truly breathe.
The weight of Bartholomew's shadow, of his threats, of the fear he instilled, had finally lifted. They stopped beneath the shade of a sprawling oak tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like hopeful arms. Nathan turned to face her, his hands gently cupping her face, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. His gaze was tender, unwavering. "Emma," he said, his voice a low rumble, "we can start fresh, a real life, free from all of it." A tear, born not of sorrow, but of profound joy, escaped Emma's eye and traced a path down her cheek. Nathan caught it with his thumb. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Nathan, a real life, with you." In that moment, beneath the sprawling oak, with the dust of the courtroom behind them and the promise of a vast, open future ahead, they chose love. A love forged in hardship, tempered by courage, and now, finally, ready to blossom, forever free from fear and doubt. Their journey had been long and arduous, but standing there, hand in hand, they knew it was only just beginning.